Thanks for inviting me. It's always a great pleasure to sit in a room with other people who are trying to understand the complexities of slavery and memorialisation. Probably 20 years ago, there'd have been 5 people in this room. Things have exploded in very good ways, if that could be said. I just leaving up for your as an advertisement. The website for the Institute for Black Atlantic Research, which we only set up for a few months. There will be a lot of events next year, and you'll hear a lot more from us. We had the opportunity to get Carol Phillips to come over and open the institute, so we took that opportunity, even though we might have waited 6 months otherwise. We had a wonderful opening with over 120 people there. We aim to be an institute that's at the forefront of the study of the Black Atlantic in Europe. What we saw as a gap was that in Britain in particular, there's quite a lot of institutes around slavery studies, which is really, really important, and I'm not going to undermine that. And those institutes are often run by historians and social scientists, who are very important people. I did think that too often the creative and cultural arts were left out of these kind of institutes. And so when I had the opportunity, together with my colleague, one of the most famous Black British artists in Britain and worldwide famous, she's just exhibited in the Korean Biennale, Labaina Himid, we decided to take the opportunity to set up an institute. So there will be at least 4 or 5 events in the next year which we're going to be involved in, and we'll be out there talking about those. And just get in touch with me if you need any more information. Okay, today I'm going to talk about slavery, racial injustice, guerrilla memorialisation in the Circum-Atlantic. And my impetus really is to present the work I've been doing for the last 10 or 12 years. I published a book called Creating Memorials, Building Identities, The Politics of Memory in the Black Atlantic. Too long a title, I know, but, sometimes you just want to call a book stuff, but you know it won't sell. Or maybe it would sell better if you called it stuff. But anyway, that was the impetus there was really to have several case studies about slavery, the history of racism and memorialisation across several different geographies, across several different disciplines. I work in visual arts, I work in music, I work in history, literary and cultural studies generally. So, and the impetus for the book really was to follow on from my first book, Radical Narratives of the Black Atlantic, which was a similar lot of case studies, but to concentrate on memory and memorials through that. And I continue with this work. And this paper I'm going to present today is really a kind of synthesis of that work at this present time. And will give you some kind of idea of that work. I'm moving on to sort of do work now in kind of contemporary slavery and comparing bonded labour to slave labour in terms of the cultural representations of these, looking at things like the Chinese cockle pickers who died on Morecambe Bay and looking at representations of them by black artists in this country, for instance. And so just I'm very interested in not allowing us to be hung up totally on race, in looking at gender and class as well. And I think that far too often, especially North American critics, ignore class in particular. They manage gender. They utterly ignore class, many of them. So, and this has been a big bugbear of mine, working against and with colleagues in black studies in the States. Might be because I'm a working class boy myself. Could be that. But also, a figure like Robert Wedderburn. Who in this room has heard of Robert Wedderburn? Right. Okay. Robert Wedderburn is the most important black radical revolutionary of the 18th and early 19th century. I've written about him extensively, and the reason I write about him is so that other people will write about him. and I started writing about him in 2003, and since then I think there's been virtually nothing written, especially by literary scholars. And I wrote it for literary scholars to tell them to get out of their boring 18th century obsession with Wordsworth and talk about some real radicals, but they didn't manage it yet. Hopefully they will do sometime. I love Wordsworth. I just thought I'd just have a gratuitous kick at the fact that the scholars ignore an amazing man like Robert Wedderburn, who in... sorry, I'm just going to ramble now. Robert Wedderburn, it is stuff. Robert Wedderburn, who wrote from his jail one of the most Swiftian and wonderful attacks on the established church, and he was in jail for blasphemy. He was very lucky he was in jail for blasphemy, because if he hadn't been in jail for blasphemy, he'd have been arrested as one of the co-conspirators of the Cato conspiracy and would have been hanged, along with his fellow Black Briton, Wild Bill Davidson. So, you know, these people are really interesting, but very much ignored. But today, I'm not going to talk about Robert Wedderburn, but I just thought I'd have... I didn't know I was going to have him in there, but we've got to improvise sometimes, haven't we? So what I'm going to talk about today is this. Now, for once, and I spend my whole life going, there's a bloody London conspiracy and everyone talks about London all the time, but today I'm going to talk about London. I'm really sorry for all you northerners in the room, but I wanted to talk about this in terms of a certain specific kind of idea, really, of London, and the importance of a particular memorial there, which Londoners don't know about, let alone anyone else, so, and other things as well. But I wanted to start really by in the northwest, and I wanted to start in the northwest really because it's there I've been involved both as an activist and as a scholar. Who's visited Sambo's grave? Just Raphael. Sambo's grave is near Morecambe, just outside Lancaster, and it's in a spot and a place which is cut off by the tide twice a day, and it's become an amazing site of pilgrimage. And I take lots of people out there. You'll notice these coloured stones around the memorial. They're brought there by school children. It's often used as a site of for education, especially for primary school children. They take coloured stones there to remember the slave boy Sambo in around 1736 was left on Sunderland Point by his master, whilst his master went on into town, probably to arrange his sale to one of the big houses in Lancashire. Whilst he was away in town, which is about 3 miles as the ship sails up the estuary, Sambo was probably ill already, got iller, and he died probably of pneumonia, although the poem written in 1796 by the Reverend James Watson on that plaque you see there talks about him dying of homesickness. We don't know whether he was African or Caribbean. We know he's a black boy, almost certainly not come straight from Africa. He could definitely come on the ship from the Caribbean. Whether he was one of the cargo, I'm using that in inverted commas obviously, who was taken as the ship's captain as part of his payment for doing the voyage, or whether he was picked up in the Caribbean to bring over to sell, we don't know. We know nothing virtually about him. The only reason we know anything about him is because the people of Sunderland Point where he died in the pub where he was being looked after. He wasn't being restrained, we know that. He was being looked after, he was ill, he was sick, and he was up in the upstairs room there. The people there sent to his master and said, "What shall we do with this body?" And the master said, "Do with it what you will, it is of no use to me now." So the people of Sunderland Point got together. He was non-Christian, so he couldn't be taken across to the mainland to be buried at Overton churchyard. So they decided, a farmer said he had some land in a rabbit warren, and they decided to take him in a procession and to bury him in the rabbit warren. If he'd have been buried in Overton Church, we wouldn't have his gravesite. It would not be there. Paupers' graves on the, are not. They don't have, literally they don't have headstones. This one didn't have a headstone, but because it's the only grave there, eventually the Reverend James Watson came along, and his brother was a slave trader. And probably out of guilt, he stood at Sunderland Point every weekend for a whole summer, taking money from the visitors there to erect a slab over the grave. And on that slab, he wrote his, you get the final three stanzas of his execrable, absolutely deplorably bad poem about Sambo, which is sentimental tripe. But it's people who like that sort of thing really do quite like it. I don't like it at all. But it's wonderful that it's there. It has been vandalised. What you see there is a new version of that. So and this is, people in Sunderland Point have continually looked after this gravesite. It's an incredible place, and the landowner there looks after it now. Sometimes inappropriate things get put on there, like gollywogs. They're taken off virtually straight away. Sometimes there's graffiti, that's dealt with. The people there's only about 30 people live there, take care of this grave. And there are pilgrimages to it. Loads and loads of people find out about it, go there. It's an incredible space and place. It's a place where memorialisation happens. And go there, and if you need some directions or some help to get there, or you want me to take you on a tour, just email me. I love going out there. It's beautiful. Beautiful. It's kind of this kind of place where you go to it across the Strand, and you feel like you're going to this kind of you feel like you're on a pilgrimage. In fact. Okay, so what do you do at a site like that? How do you create and commit your own memorialisation there? What happened was that the grave gets quite covered and crowded with these beautiful coloured stones, and it gets tidied up all the time, etc. But in 2008, some schools from the Carlisle area, which, if you know the geography, is about 60, 70 miles away, decided to visit the grave site. But they didn't want to kind of have their 40 or 50 children kind of put yet more coloured stones on the grave. So they created this memorial, which is on bamboo sticks with stones with personal messages to the slave boy, Sambo. And the messages are quite poignant. What happened to this memorial was it's organic, so the bamboo collapsed and the stones collapsed. And that's kind of, I think, a really interesting kind of idea of creating a memorial. It's about kind of thinking about a memorial that talks to decay in itself, in and of itself, which I found really moving. It did then kind of resemble kind of quite a hodgepodge, and was eventually, I think, really mistakenly cleared away. That's one of the problems with a site like this, where the people there are looking after it, and their idea is to keep things as tidy as possible. And that's another thing. Memorialisation maybe shouldn't be tidy. Yeah, let's not have tidy memorialisation. That's what the Tories want. You can just imagine them thinking, "Oh, that's a bit of a mess. Let's get rid of that." Okay, so. This memorial has been there, as I say, since 1796 in Lancaster, the city of Lancaster. And in around 2001, I'd been to see the wonderful memorial in Amsterdam. Was it 2002? Yeah, 2002 it was. And came back and did I have a dramatic tableau of the slave trade, which I take to schools and to prisons and increasingly to prisons, I don't know why, but it's 18 different characters, and I move them round and sort of try to describe the history of slavery through drama, really. And what happened was I was invited to a meeting of school teachers from Lancashire to show them this tableau as a means of getting them to be able to do it themselves in schools. And so I did this, and then at the end of that meeting, myself and curators and a few people from the arts world in Lancaster sat down and said, there's a real problem, isn't it? We've got Sambo's grave and that's out there, but there's nothing in the centre of Lancaster to remember the slave trade. So we set up the Slave Trade Arts Memorial Project and got this logo from a designer friend of mine for free. Am I not a man and a brother? Am I not a woman and a sister? From the original kind of abolitionist movement. And we just decided that we were going to do something about this. And by 2005, we'd got the money together to build a memorial. It's now at the quayside in Lancaster. This is the memorial itself. We had a black artist from Manchester design the memorial. It's called Captured Africans. The acrylic bits you see in the middle, they're the decks of a slave ship. There's a bow of a slave ship and there's a mast there. There's Kevin Dalton Johnson, who was the artist for the project. Okay. You see the mast there. That details about 20 of the voyages that left Lancaster. Lancaster was the 4th largest slave port in Britain. Repeat that to yourself. Lancaster was the 4th largest slave port in Britain. Liverpool, Bristol, London, Lancaster, Whitehaven, sorry. I always get those two muddled up. Whitehaven and then Glasgow. Yeah, okay. So 200 voyages leave Lancaster. And those are the ones we've found. We think there's slightly more. So we detail on this memorial facing the people of Lancaster as they walk to go across the bridge to go to Morecambe, if anyone ever wants to go there. Sorry. But they might well do. It's a very nice place. We detail the name of the slave ship captain, the amount of slaves that were taken on board the ship, and the name of the ships. And the ships have beautiful names like the Jolly Bachelor, yeah, or the Princess Royal or whatever. They've all got names like that. The important thing for us, though, was the name of the individuals who'd taken part in the slave trade. Many of them are or were mayors of Lancaster. Many of them are typical northern names, Satterthwaite, Foster, or typical British names even. And what we wanted to do was to face the people of Lancaster and Lancashire and people from beyond who came to look at that memorial with their own names or familiar names. Names that if you went into a phone book, and I know no one does anymore, all this highfalutin nonsense that they use some kind of digital nonsense to do it. But if you did go to a phone book, all of those names would be in there. And that's the ordinariness of this. It's the ordinariness, the banality of slavery is that we were all involved. Our descendants were all involved, for good and for ill. And Lancaster had a problem with amnesia. It doesn't anymore. And it's partly because of this memorial and the work that we did. We also got involved with school children, got them to make a trail around Lancaster, and they designed, with the help of artists, a beautiful trail, and you can get that in the Maritime Museum for 50p, and it's a 4-page thing with all the information you might want to know. And in that in that trail, is the story of this house. This is on Castle Hill in Lancaster. These are the gorgeous, beautiful Georgian houses which have been the money's been made from slavery. And so you can see this, and this was the Satterthwaite house. They actually were not only slave traders, they also owned plantations in the Caribbean. And in the 1770s, they came back. They'd been in the Caribbean on the plantations. They came back and they brought with them a slave servant called Frances Elizabeth Johnson. Okay. Frances Elizabeth Johnson was born in the Caribbean. We don't know, we know her birth date. The only reason we know her birth date is we know her baptismal date. That's her baptismal date, the 2nd of April 1778. She was baptised in Lancaster Priory by this great kind of family of Lancaster, the Satterthwaites. And we don't know where she's buried. This is not a burial stone. What happened is that in the 1940s in Gloucestershire, there was a black hand, mummified black hand, above the fireplace. And these are the descendants of the Satterthwaites. When she died, they wanted to keep, it's a bit like keeping a piece of a pet or something, they wanted to keep a piece of her with them. And then it got handed down through the generations. To her horror, ended up in the hands of a woman, I don't need to talk about who she is, who wanted to do the right thing with this hand. So she took it back to the West Indies, and she was going to bury it there, but then found out that in fact Frances Elizabeth Johnson had spent more of her time in Lancaster, and she was advised in the Caribbean to bring the hand back to Lancaster. She brought the hand back to Lancaster and got permission to bury the hand in the Lancaster Priory Remembrance Garden. And you can see it in the Remembrance Garden there today. And she's written a small pamphlet about the hand and the kind of strange nature of this object. And I've written at great length about the strange nature of this object in an article with Yoka Carducks in Atlantic Studies. And you can follow kind of more dramatically what I think about it there. But the reason I wanted to bring it to you today was just to think about, you know, memorials isn't always about the kind of neat, someone died, let's do something for them. You know, let's have something for them. There was an awful thing that happened in history, let's do something around and about it. Sometimes things are just contested and difficult. You know, and you can't always choose the manner of your legacy. This woman is the most, you know, she's just she's a poet, she's a lovely lady, and she ended up having a hand in her possession that came from a slave her ancestors had owned. You know, so you know, and how do you deal with that appropriately? And you know, to an extent, that's the way she sought to deal with it, which, you know, you can discuss whether it was right or wrong, but she agonised over it, and there is a place anyone can go to mourn now for this life. And before this hand was reburied, there was nowhere anyone could go to mourn. Okay. The rupture of the slave trade, then the experience of slavery, introduces between blind belief and clear consciousness a gap that we've never finished filling. The absence of representation, of echo, of any sign, makes this emptiness forever yawn under our feet. Edouard Glissant. And then, national heritage is a powerful source of meaning. Those who can't see themselves reflected in the mirror are therefore excluded. Stuart Hall. The problem with memorialising the slave trade and its abolition adequately, as the epigraphs above so eloquently show, is that its tentacles spread far and wide, and its legacy is often a mere trace that's difficult to comprehend, let alone visualise, 200 years after its official ending in Britain. The hidden narratives of slavery and its consequences and the need for them to be foregrounded is nowhere more apparent than in London, and the bulk of this essay will focus on this key locale with more limited commentary by way of comparison with Amsterdam and Paris, if I get there, whose national memorials have finally been erected in the early years of the 21st century. And there is still no national memorial to the victims of slavery in Britain. The memorial in Lancaster was the first memorial on a quayside site, and I'll be talking about a London memorial soon. London was the first slave port in Britain, saw the departure of the ships owned by the Royal Africa Company and its predecessor company in the 17th century, and then throughout the 18th century as well. Most Londoners are unaware of their city's crucial role in the trade, partly because it is the most historical role. Liverpool and Bristol took over. And only vaguely aware of the later role of its financial houses in underpinning the trade. Thus, even when London's role as port city becomes secondary, its financial support ensured that Britain, through the ports of Liverpool, Bristol, Lancaster, Whitehaven and Glasgow, was the dominant slave trading nation in the 18th century. And Liverpool was the dominant port, the largest slave trading port in Europe in the 18th century. In the wake of the commemorations for the bicentenary of the ending of the slave trade in Britain and its empire in 2007, there was an even keener appreciation of a memorial silence in the heart of London. The artist Labaina Himid talked to this crucial edition of black presence in the era of slavery and abolition through to the present in her satirical performance piece, What Are Monuments For? Possible Landmarks on the Urban Map. It was first performed in Bremen, where she spoke the text whilst her doctored images were reproduced on a slide loop behind her. In this multi-essential piece, she created glossy guidebooks to London and Paris and imagined what might have been if the contribution of African peoples to the capitals had been fully taken on board. Onto these guidebook pages, she collaged portraits of African cloth design, African descended figures, both famous and unknown, and other symbols to denote the way in which the memorial landscape of a city like London could and should be different. Her ironic commentary in the self-satisfied tone of a guidebook populates London's history in radical new ways. So this is the irony is really just under the surface. Trafalgar Square, London's main venue for rallies and outdoor public meetings, was conceived by John Nash and was mostly constructed in the 1830s. As part of the drive at that time to end Britain's key role at the centre of the slave trade, a large painted bronze of the statue was erected of Toussaint Louverture, the leader of the only successful slave revolt in the Caribbean, who died in 1803 after having defeated the greatest armies of the day, including the forces of the French, the English and the Spanish. The logic of including Louverture's statue alongside Nelson's column is obvious to the multicultural historian of the early 21st century, who would want to tell the full story of this imperial struggle between Britain and France and the ramifications for the slaves who used the upheaval of war and revolution to revolt throughout the Caribbean and to free themselves in Haiti. Louverture's statue would show the crucial role of the British imperial state, while with London at its centre in seeking to limit the spread of radical abolitionism, whilst paradoxically being the home to a vibrant anti-slavery movement in the late 18th and early 19th century. But of course, there was never a statue of Toussaint Louverture in Trafalgar Square. However, Himid is aware that even statues of key black British and international figures such as Olaudah Equiano, Ignatius Sancho and Robert Wedderburn from this period, and Frederick Douglass, Henry Box Brown and Paul Robeson from later times are missing from the memorial landscape, and her astutely nuanced commentary, together with the collaged pages of the guidebook. And these pictures, I have to tell you, only exist in the collaged pages of a guidebook. Everyone kind of thinks, oh, she's made a series of beautiful prints, and there they are, and she'll be selling them for thousands. No, it's just the guidebook. I think as she gets out there and realises how excited people are by these, then they might become a series. But at the moment, you have to go into our archive and open the beautiful guidebook. There are digital images of them. I think you can find some on her website, so you could see others of these. She put some of these black figures back into the landscape, and this is designed to make the political point that memorialisation, because of its control by those unconcerned with black contributions, is a deeply troubled arena for Africans throughout the diaspora. The collaged images are sometimes quite crudely drawn or inserted and act as a kind of graffiti, an underground dialogisation that subverts the majority story of triumphant lily-white imperial progress. In this way, they're a form of what I call guerrilla memorialisation that works to rewrite the city and the nation's story from the bottom up. My use of the term here and elsewhere in this article is to describe the way memorialising sometimes takes on an overtly political character in order to challenge dominating historical narratives. I prefer the term to the idea developed in Germany around Holocaust memorialisation and monuments of counter-memorials, because it's a more active and performative expression and seems to more accurately describe the processes and creative works I describe. Himid is not the only African Atlantic artist to undertake such guerrilla memorialisation. However, her interventions are, I think, particularly astute and are combined with the self-consciousness about the memorial process, which I'll document throughout this article. Himid's reworking of the guidebook is an exemplary move of guerrilla memorialisation. This negotiates new meaning out of the interaction between what is there and what is missing, always being aware that what is lost can never be fully recovered. She subverts the imperial national narrative and makes the landscape speak its hidden and diverse histories. The city's amnesia and her act of remembrance are counterpoints that create new multiple possibilities in the hitherto monological cityscape. Himid is working against the apolitical notion that the city gives up its meaning without any work on the part of its citizens. This is the reason I term the political work of Himid and others guerrilla memorialisation. It's interventionist and deserves a more engaged vocabulary than that of the counter-memorial. Himid's guerrilla memorialisation works against the mining of corporate relations towards a new cityscape in London. Her work summons the ghosts of black presence that guidebooks elide. And I'd just like to say that I think our colleagues from Amsterdam are doing very good similar work. Her work summons the ghosts of black presence that guidebooks elide, bearing witness to how London and other cities might look if only we paid attention to those forgotten figures. Her praxis could be explicated by Avery Gordon's idea that we need new imaginative forms of critical theory that pay attention to the operation of such ghosts. As Ashani Barney Young says, the dead, the beloved who haunt the landscape as spectral traces of unresolved social history, of time out of joint, are not mere objects of melancholia, nor are they easily locatable whole subjects. Instead, they are spectres, crucibles for political meditation and historical memory. These spectres are summoned by Himid in her work, and they act on the landscape of London and Paris to reimagine them as if they fully took on board their amnesiac history of black presences. Rather than wallowing in the melancholia, which forgetting encourages, these spectres are in Himid's work the occasion for the refashioning and reconceptualisation of European history and of African contributions to it. So, on the fourth plinth, we eventually get, this is in Trafalgar Square, the Anglo-Nigerian artist Yinka Shonibari, his work, Nelson's Ship in a Bottle. It's a 130th replica of Nelson's flagship Victory, on which he died during the Battle of Trafalgar in October 1805. Like the original, it's made from canvas, twine, traditional oak, hardwood and brass, in a perspex bottle. Its sails, though, use African colour and celebrate Africa. As the website for the model asserts, the large sails are made of exuberant and richly patterned textiles, commonly associated with African dress and symbolic of African identity and independence. He also, though, in using these, talks back to the way in which cloths were key in the trade of the slave trade. Nelson's uptight presence in the middle of the square, I say, is dialogised by Shonibari's funky and colourful reinvention of the victory. As Adrian Searle asserts, Shonibari's work does manage to celebrate both Nelson's success at Trafalgar and the post-colonial multi-ethnic mix and mingle of Britain today. This concentration on the contemporary implications in most press coverage of the unveiling of Shonibari's marvellous work should not elide its historical resonances, and the clue to these comes at the base of Nelson's column itself, where there is a frieze showing the Admiral's death, and one of the sailors depicted is an African sailor holding a musket. The Royal Navy was home to many Caribbean African sailors, maybe as many as 20% at the time of Trafalgar. These sailors included officers such as John Perkins, the first black mixed race officer in the Royal Navy. This Jamaican-born sailor achieved the rank of post-captain before his death, but made his name as commander of the Punch in the Caribbean from 1778 to 1780, when he captured 315 ships and over 3,000 prisoners, which led to his nickname of Jack Punch. And again, who has heard of Jack Punch, the black mixed race officer in the Royal Navy? Who has heard of any of these people? The Navy in Nelson's time was far from a monoglot, ethnically white force. Black figures such as the Cato Street conspirator William Davidson, the early anarchist Robert Wedderburn, and the most famous black Briton of the 18th century, Olaudah Equiano, all served in the Navy. There were 22 nationalities on the ship, including Jamaican, Indian, and even 4 French people. The work encapsulates this as well as being one of our greatest national icons. This is the triumph of Shonibari's work, that it dialogises the imperial history through its depiction of the victory to illuminate its full multicultural ramifications for then and for now. A crucible for political meditation and historical memory. Okay. I'm going to talk through the next memorial, and I can answer questions on it if you want to know more about it. Who's been to the Guilt of Cain Memorial? It's in next door to Fenchurch Street Station in London, Fen Court. Some people live within a very few miles of this, so do try and get to see it. It's been there since 2008. One of the problems with this memorial is that it was built by the with money from the Corporation of London, and they had Desmond Tutu come to open it, but they didn't really engage with the local community, so the local community has no real ownership of it. The poem on it, Guilt of Cain, is written by the Mancunian, but resident now in London often, I don't know, might even have 2 places he lives, Lem Sissay, and the sculpture was done by a Scottish sculptor called Michael Viscocci. It is like the poem runs over all of these columns in the background. It's meant to be about both slavery and abolition. So this plinth is both a pulpit for people to speak from against slavery, so that's the abolition bit, or an auction block for putting the slaves on. So it has dual functions. The poem itself is a complex poem. You can find it on the internet. Just look up The Guilt of Cain. I was going to have a handout for you, but I wasn't at my office yesterday for Guilt, G-I-L-T of Cain. Obviously the homophone guilt as well as guilt, but guilt is how it's spelt. And the poles are meant to represent sugar canes, but also people at the talk or at the auction of the slaves. And you'll see this is a place where city workers come and sit and have their sandwiches. It's really right in the heart of the City of London. So it's sort of brilliantly placed in lots of ways, because that's where the devil's deeds were done, but also miles from any place of a black community as well. So, there's problems. And they could have put it somewhere different in that City of London area where it could have been owned by the black community much more readily. So the poem runs through this. I'll just read from the first stanza. Here is the ask price on the closed position. History is no inherent acquisition. For here the technical correction upon the act, a merger of truth and actual fact, on the spot, on the money, the spread. The dealer lied when the dealer said the bull was charging, the bear was dead. The market must calculate per capita, not head. And then the last stanza. Cain gathers Cain as guilt gift to his land, but whose sword of truth shall not sleep in his hand? Who shall unlock the stocks and share, break the bond, the bind and bound, lay bare the truth? Cash flows, runs deep, but spirit deeper. You ask, am I my brother's keeper? I answer, by nature, by spirit, by rightful laws, my name, my brother, Wilberforce. So you see the words from the poem are mashed up all through the sculpture. I think it's a wonderful piece of work. I'll write about it at length in my book, so you can read about it there. This is another portion from the guidebook. This is Greenwich, and what Labanahim had said was, Greenwich is key to the slave trade. I'm going to put a slave ship there. But what she decided to do was to have on the slave ship a revolt happening as it goes on, to say, my people didn't just stand back and take it. And her text is ironic again. Greenwich is best known as the place for which the world's time is measured. The sea has always played an extremely important role in British history. There are rooms devoted to trade and empire, but an exterior highlight for visitors is the massive wooden slave ship marooned on the grass. Every weekend and summer weekday, dozens of children take part in a chaotic staged reenactment for the rescue and repatriation of thousands of soon-to-be enslaved Africans and the subsequent trial and punishment of their captors. So again, it's ironic. If only we had memorials like that. Okay. And here's Paris. Here's Paris. So she goes to the streets of Paris. She's got the mashed up guidebook there, and she says, right in the middle of Paris, there's a memorial to the victims of the slave trade. Right there on the canal. Isn't it wonderful we've got one now? And here it is. Obviously, there isn't one there. There is a memorial in Paris, in the Luxembourg Gardens, opened by President Chirac, whoever he was. Sorry, you forget about, that was gratuitous, but, bit of gratuitous politicking didn't do no one no harm. And it's a broken chain there, you can see. This costs something ludicrous like £750,000 for a couple of bits of broken chain. And on it are words like économique, fraternité, liberté, etc., etc. And people walk past this without knowing what it's about because it's got a tiny thing telling you what it's about. And I always stand around it going, trying to speak in French, going, look at this, it's really important. And, and the problem is that if anyone knows about the Gardens of Luxembourg, there are about 100 bloody statues there, and this is just part of the statue orgy. It is an orgy of statuary. And, so how can you have a memorial for the victims of the slavery which is part of an orgy of statuary? You can't. It won't work. And they've got something to 9/11 about 100 yards away. It's like, oh, we go for this tragedy. Come on. Let's have it somewhere better, for God's sake. And you can see this is from the other side. So one side it looks like metal, and the other side he's done this jazzy thing. So he's sort of saying one side's slavery, the other side's emancipation. I just hate this memorial, but I can understand that other people might quite like it. But I just think it's diabolically bad, really, and a diabolical waste of £750,000. Ours costs 45,000. I think it's better. I'm sorry, but I do. And it's a very bad image of the memorial in. I'll just see if I've got a better image. Yeah, that's better. Sorry about that. Of the beautiful memorial in the Oosterpark. Oosterpark. sorry, Ulsterpark. Yep, Ulsterpark. Okay, let's turn this into a Dutch lesson, shall we, please? Can we just tell me what it's called, and then I won't mention it again. Oosterpark in, sorry, I'll stop saying, in Holland, in Amsterdam. And it's an incredibly moving memorial. It's used by the black community there, especially on Slavery Remembrance Day, which is July the 1st. Something else happens July the 4th, which God knows what that is. And you should go on that day. It's a wonderful carnivalesque day, and they adorn this this statue with beautiful flowers. And it was done by a Surinamese sculptor, Edwin de Vries. Sorry, I do know his name. So I'll just end with a brief ending, and then I'll just end with this image, but that's not because I'm talking about the image, just so you can see it. This is Ellen Gallagher's Bird in Hand, a wonderful image, and I can tell you a bit about that if you want. You can read about it in my book. I've run out of copies, so I gave my last one away the other day, and it's reprinting. The best memorials are those that transcend the limited and often chauvinistic national story to remember a more complex and multifaceted transnational narrative to help us in the post-colonial present. This is illustrated at its most germane in Schönebari and Cisse and Viscocci's London memorials, the Bainer Hamid's guerrilla response to the lack of memorial spaces in London and Paris, and also to de Vries's memorial in Amsterdam. These memorial interventions are illustrative of the way a conflicted and dialogic response to the amnesiacal landscape that surrounds us already might be the best route forward. By constructing memorial spaces that remember the enslaved Africans and their contributions in ways that enable citizens space to question and debate the horrors and their legacies, memorialisation is construed as future-directed. It's a work in progress, and most important, a refusal of inertia and ossification. As Paul Ricoeur said, it's justice that turns memory into a project, and it's this same project of justice that gives the form of the future and of the imperative to the duty of memory. Following on from Ricoeur, I would contend that the most effective memorials are testament to this future-directed vision, which refuses the conservative and often state-sponsored desire for a politically reactionary closure and looks to ask for more multi-directional questions than it supplies didactic answers. Thank you.
I'll in a moment have a sip of water or two. Thank you very much, Alan. Incredibly interesting, stimulating and amusing. This is our opportunity. We've got 8 or 9 minutes to ask any questions or make any comments if anybody would like to. So please do raise your hand.
When I first came to the UK, I spent a lot of time in Worthington and Whitehaven.
All right, yeah.
I must admit, I absolutely... In Whitehaven, there's a thing about rum.
That's right.
But that's about it. Is anybody doing anything?
Yeah, in the wake of 2007, an awful lot of work was done in Whitehaven, and on that coast in schools. There's a little bit more now in the museum there, and there's kind of work been done on the beginnings of trails and things. There's a slave grave in Whitehaven, and that's been much better marked now. So, you know...
Because there's all that stuff about George Washington's mother or...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No, very true. But one of the good things about 2007 and the centenary is that lots of these smaller places, money went into actually doing a little bit more. So it has got much better there.
Any comments, queries? People
Well, I just want to say I was really happy to hear your presentation, very lively, and also I love the use of your talk on artists, and I want to catch their names a bit better.
Yeah, I'll write them out for you. Lubaina Hamid is my colleague, Lubaina, and then Hamid, Himid, and she's been working on plans for a memorial for the victims of slavery since the early 90s, but also does a gigantic load of other work around the history of slavery and memory in Black British culture.
Right. So how many sort of memorial sites would you say are there in the UK?
Depends what you call memorial sites.
Broader sense,
Those in the modern era that have been built, there's the one in London, the one in Lancaster, there's a bridge in Bristol. There's memorials like the one in Manchester of Abraham Lincoln, which tells the story of slavery, if you can dig to find it. One of the very sad things is there is not a memorial for the victims of slavery in Liverpool. There is a wonderful museum, but we need a memorial there.
James?
James Renton, HL. I have two questions, Alan. The first one is, I wonder what your thoughts are about the Ferncourt Memorial focusing on abolition and Wilberforce. I wonder, isn't it problematic in the sense that it's producing a redemptive narrative for the City of London, produced by the City of London, and to eat their lunch on, think how wonderful we were in the end, and how wonderful we are now commemorating the fact that we were wonderful. And I mean, you mentioned Lincoln, again, using Lincoln as a way in. Well, it's all about, again, the path away from slavery. And the other question I had was, what do you think the role is in commemoration of this kind of ground level, local commemoration compared with the global campaign by CARICOM to get reparations for slavery and actions by states on an international political level? Do you see any connection between these spheres?
Okay, yeah. The first question, I think that the poem Guild of Cain is a wonderful poem with a terrible ending. You know, that's the truth. And 2007, many people said, turned into a Wilbur Fest, you know, because it became far too much about the abolitionists, and not enough about white abolitionists, and not enough about black efforts against slavery. So I agree that there's a potential problematic. I think that the memorial itself is something I was very sceptical about because of the poem. I went to it though, and I think that it actually is an exceptionally moving account of both slavery and abolition. I'm willing to have the debate with someone who's been there and been with it, because it might not work for everyone. But I just think that having those canes standing up, which sort of represent people as well, and having the words of the poem, so you keep on coming against words like ingrained on it, and they're often about money and centrality of money in exchange and trade, and the way in which people are dehumanized by that, I think was very, very powerful. But I think that I haven't talked to Lem about why it ends with Wilberforce. You know, and I'd quite like to sort of just talk to him about it, because I think that to an extent he wants to use the word force as much as to use the word Wilberforce. And I think he's actually working really cleverly with Wilberforce's name to undermine the kind of the white Anglo-centric way of thinking about Wilberforce. Yeah. So I mean that would be, he might have had other things in mind. But from what I know of Lem Sissay, who's a radical poet, I don't think he was trying to aggrandise Wilberforce. The Lincoln Memorial is a memorial which I have a great deal of affection for, because it's a memorial which commemorates the links between white working class Mancunians and the fight against slavery. And Lincoln is there because of that. And if you look on the memorial, it shows the letter from Lincoln to the people of Manchester, thanking them for the support against fighting against slavery. And the letter back from the people of Manchester, which was sent from a meeting of 4,000 workers in Manchester to Lincoln. And I think Lincoln's a very troubling figure. There's lots of things we might disagree with him, but I think that memorial's only partly about Lincoln. I think it's about transnational class and race solidarity. So, but yeah, I understand the problematics. Finally, local communities and reparations. The whole question of reparations is such a large, big question up there, and it's very important, and we need to get people engaged. But the way you get people engaged on that larger question is to get them engaged on the question of what happened and what happens in your community. And that's what we tried to do for the Slave Trade Arts Memorial Project, was to say what happened here, what's still happening here in terms of global unfair trade, which we contribute to, and what still happens here in terms of cockle pickers dying in bonded labour on the sands of Morecambe Bay. So we want to do that as a means to then get people to go to that next step. And I don't think you can get many people to go to the next step to think about reparations until they've thought about the local steps.
Thank you so much. This is so inspiring for me with the tour that I developed in Amsterdam about Black heritage. That
Brilliant.
is absolutely in connection with the mindset you just talked about. So thank you. You've given me some great new ideas even on how to frame it. I'm just curious, how have you engaged the municipality or the state or the government in this discussion and in creating these memorials? Have you experienced a lot of resistance or support? I'm really curious how you approach that.
The Slave Trade Arts Memorial Project had the support of Lancaster City Council from about day one. Incredibly supportive. The mayor of the city, the leader of the council of the city were both there and spoke at the unveiling. They gave support for the trail, which has been written by the school children. They gave that support despite, and maybe Kevin will remember this, lots of nasty letters in the press by Lancaster residents saying it's a waste of the council's money.
So it did come, though, from the top down to...
Well, it came from the bottom up with us, our community group working, and then came from the bottom up with us asking the council for support, and then came from the top down with them saying, yes, we will support you. And then there were people in the middle, some of whom supported us, some of whom wrote nasty letters in the paper. We wrote back, and there was debates, and the debates were healthy, you know. And we've got a lot more people thinking about slavery. It's not, have the debate, don't cover it up, you know.
Good point. One last question if I may ask. Contrary to what I found also very interesting since we've been here, is everyday persons like the taxi cab driver we rode here with, who made a statement that said, well, ever since slavery was abolished, the economics have gone, sort of downhill. Well, that kind of statement would never be heard in Amsterdam or the Netherlands, at least not in my experience. But I find it interesting that you've gotten the community to, at least on some level, it appears, to get involved. Unlike a footnote to the slavery monument in Amsterdam in 2002, the black community was kept out.
Yes.
So there is this real...
So it's used now by the black community, but they weren't involved in it.
And used is in quotes, because there's some resistance even now to embracing or owning the monument because of this beginning that was very difficult. It's changing, I think, but it's taking a long time. What recommendations would you have for how to improve that?
I think that it's important not to get a rose-tinted view. We were very lucky in Lancaster. Colleagues here from Liverpool would tell you that it's a very contested thing in Liverpool. One of the lucky things about Liverpool is it's a small city with a very small black community who people don't feel threatened by. So we didn't have this kind of contested area. We had an area where people wanted to forget, but we didn't have a contested area so much. So once we were shooting, as they'd say, we were shooting into an open goal to an extent. I think if you look, people know about this issue in Britain. One of the reasons for that is we went through 2007, where it was more in the media, and that was very important for us. You might find that after 2014, people, it takes a while, might be a bit more engaged with the issue as well, and knowing about it. But knowing about it, unfortunately, as loads of people in this room will tell you, doesn't that they're going to agree with you. And there are loads of people out there who still want to fight against this memorialisation. You know, it's just, the problem for me is that I just had such a happy experience in Lancaster that, you know, I'm just talking from that experience, but other memorial projects I've been involved in, other ways in which I've tried to talk about this have been much less easy.
Thank you very much. If anybody needs to catch Alan, you're going to be...
I'll be around for the next day or two. Yeah.
Just a little bit longer, excellent, be able to catch him again later. But let's express our thanks to him today.
Yeah.